You're listening to KZSC's Voces, Críticas, Critical Voices. I am your producer and host, Silvana Falcon. Today I'm here with Elise Granata and Helen Aldana of the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, also known as the MA. Elise is the MA's community manager, and she thrives off the sweet nectar of people power. She is the founder of the participatory, time-based social experience called Power Hour, which she'll talk about later on the show. She graduated with a BA in Arts Management from SUNY Purchase College and comes to the MA after work in music, theater, dance, and booking zombie proms and roller discos on the East Coast. Helen is the MA's Intercultural Programs Coordinator and a graduate of UC Santa Cruz with a degree in philosophy and art. Helen is grateful to have worked with amazing folks here in Santa Cruz, including Rape Prevention Education, Leonel Cantu Queer Center, Walnut Avenue Family and Women's Center, the Kresge Multicultural Education Committee, and in Los Angeles with the One Archives Foundation. As the Intercultural Programs Coordinator at the MA, Helen collaborates with community members full-time. Together, they create spaces for folks to connect and dialogue at the MA and engage with art outside of the museum. I've invited them to the show to talk about their work at the MA. Welcome, Elise and Helen, to KZSC's Voces Críticas. Elise, let's start with you. As a community manager for the MA, what are some of your plans for the upcoming months?
As part of my work, we really work with their incredible volunteers, members, and all of the people who collaborate with the MA. 90% of our public offerings are actually created with somebody from the communities. In my role, I get to kind of be that extra layer between the event that they create or the volunteer shift that they do and actually designing fun opportunities for them to feel loved and feel delighted and really feel empowered to continue to share their own voice and creative expression at the MA and beyond in Santa Cruz County too. And my colleague Victoria Lee, who's the current community catalyst at the MA, has been really reshaping the volunteer program to be one that is empowering, exciting, and really different for volunteers. We have about 220 volunteers currently, and we have about 10 to 15 different opportunities every month that really center a lot of Helen's programs. Every week we have something, whether it's helping out with a craft activity or leading a gigantic procession, a dia. Recently we kind of did just an overall assessment to be how can we make these volunteer opportunities not just filling what the MA needs, but something that's actually creating great experiences for volunteers themselves. I'm super excited about the changes that are happening there, and especially for students, it's such a great way to get involved, get off campus, check out something cool downtown, and really plug into something that is making a difference in our community.
And for you, Helen, as the Intercultural Programs Coordinator for the MA, what are some of your plans for the upcoming months?
There's a handful of programs happening, actually, and they all are offering different opportunities for folks to engage with different content. We have our first Crash Course program happening next week. Crash Course is just a really fun way for folks to learn with other adults and in a very participatory way. And that doesn't necessarily mean hands-on. It also means through conversations or through questioning or through dance, just really anything that folks can do to express, what do you want to learn and how are you learning it? And then we have one of our big monthly programs called Stories Under the Influence, and the theme is life and death. And that one's a lot about hearing people's stories and sharing your own stories in connection to the story that was just shared. And so the influence is a lot on the theme. The stories are influenced by this theme, and the stories people are sharing with one another is influenced by those 5 chosen speakers. And then, of course, Dia de los Muertos is happening in November 3rd. It's a huge partnership with Senderos, a nonprofit organization of Santa Cruz County that centers a lot on preserving Oaxaqueño culture and traditions. And we're having Dia de los Muertos, and that's going to be a 3-day event pretty much. So on Thursday, we're going to be having a crash course that's centered on the traditions of Dia de los Muertos and hoping to work with Nido de Lenguas, which is based at UCSC. And then we're also having our first Friday festival that's going to be centering around everyone checking out the exhibitions for free at the Museum of Art and History, as well as decorating sugar skulls and watching Los Diablos perform and other musical performances. And then the big one on Saturday, the 3rd of November, that is festival at Cooper Street. We close down the street. We move on to a procession to the Mission, continue the procession to Evergreen Cemetery when there's more performances, delicious food, and Sabrasura is also going to be performing, which is a UCSC dance troupe.
So you mentioned the theme life and death. How did you come up with that theme, and how do you go about identifying possible themes?
So at the moment, I am just choosing with other programs that we're having or other holidays or celebrations that are happening near or on those days. I am always open to hearing what other folks want to have these programs center on. This is our second Stories Under the Influence, so I am pretty much taking the lead with my interns on this, but in the future, I do enjoy listening to what other folks want to see.
Elise, you mentioned being excited about the changes to the volunteer program. What else makes you excited about how the MA does its work?
I just really wanted to echo kind of everything Helen was sharing. I think it can't be overstated, again, how much in the museum is really co-created with our community. The MA really aims to be of, by, and for all of Santa Cruz. And so I'm just really excited about continuing to plug in really incredible ideas and works of art and organizations from around our community into the events that are happening weekly here. This year, we doubled our events. We had about 2 events per month, and we've been doing about 5 events per week, including all the work that Helen's been doing. And what that ends up looking like is that we're able to work with so many more partners from around our community. And it really, honestly, just starts with an email to us of somebody saying, hey, I am a weaver locally and I really want to teach my style of weaving to a class of kids for free, or I love teaching yoga and want to share that at the MA somehow. And so once that happens, we're able to work with those partners and actually co-create a program that might look like their original vision, might look like our original vision, or might look like oftentimes something that neither of us ever imagined. And so, whether it's something that you want to share, in your own work, or if you just kind of want to get involved, I really can't emphasize enough how many opportunities there are to do something at the MA. To me, that is really the secret sauce of what makes that place so special and really reflective of the community that we live in. I think oftentimes museums can feel very separate or distant from the actual neighborhoods or communities or counties that they're in. And I see it almost like being very porous. Whatever is happening in Santa Cruz County is honestly what's being reflected at the MA. As a maker, an artist, an activist yourself, I think is a great place to show your work. And then as somebody who's just living in the community, it's a great way to just get a snapshot of whatever our county is kind of feeling at this moment, right? Because in a given week, you're going to interact with artists, issues, ideas that are really the pulse of our county.
So who should people contact if they have an idea to share?
If you go to santacruzmah.org/contact.
This model you mentioned of co-creating with the community has been an intentional shift the MA made several years ago. Can you talk more about that shift in vision of what the MA could be in this community?
The MA's been around for about 20 years. A lot of people don't know that. There was an art center and a historical trust that combined forces to become the Museum of Art and History. And so around 2011, because of a mix of things, because of the recession and some other stuff, the museum was just doing super poorly, and they were actually about to close because they had maybe $14,000 in the bank. And then the board decided to bring on Nina Simon, who is really known in her work as being a museum visionary, really changing what museums can be about. And I think really the bigger picture beyond that was just the museum was not relevant for people. It was sharing ideas of people that did not look like people who live in Santa Cruz or more of a traditional institutional museum. And it just wasn't relevant, compelling, empowering for people in our community. And so we knew there needed to be some shift to become more relevant. And so after that shift, really the biggest thing that changed was really making this community first, community-centered approach happen. And again, because it's become reflective of showing the work of artists and people in our community, it becomes so much more inviting for someone to say, oh, hey, my friend is performing here this week. I'm going to go check it out, even though I've never been to the museum before. Or I've never shown my work in Santa Cruz as an activist, and now I get to actually host a rally here. So there's a lot of really incredible stuff that the MA's become a platform for. And then over the last few years, it's just become a real thriving epicenter of Santa Cruz, again, because of the people.
You're listening to Elise Granata and Helen Aldana of the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. Elise is the museum's community manager, and Helen is the museum's intercultural programs coordinator. Helen, could you talk about how your position as the intercultural program coordinator is an essential part to the co-creative vision that Elise mentioned is so important to the MA's work?
When I first started working at the museum, my job centered on Third Friday festivals, and those were very much centered on generating programs that were intergenerational. So we had kids come, seniors come, and a lot of families would attend these programs. And something that we noticed from our events were that a lot of just adults and students weren't attending these programs. And so once we created these programs that we knew worked for families, we kept those through our Friday Make and our Sunday Play programs. And then we thought, well, let's create this new slate of programs for just adults, for just students, for folks to connect with one another and bridge. A lot of our programs have a lot of bonding, so folks come and relate to one another on Dia de los Muertos or relate to one another with our history forum and our publications committees. But what about those folks that wanted to meet other people who don't have that family or just wanting to find that community and bond over something that they never thought they'd be engaging with? Especially at a museum, which is such a different space for people to socialize and connect and then end up sharing their stories. And so that's how intercultural programs came about, really just centering on those adults, as well as these other programs that I also oversee, the bilingual programs, really seeing like, what about those audiences that are families but don't come because our marketing isn't in Spanish or our signage indoors aren't in Spanish. And so it's really creating that space as well to have those conversations. I have Café Charla that happen once a month at the museum. We have it out in the Secret Garden. It's coffee and bread over a general topic that can really bring up very relevant issues that are happening in our county and our neighborhood and our world, pretty much. And intercultural programs are really centered on like bridging. My whole job is just bridging folks with the museum, bridging folks inside the museum, bridging folks with one another outside of the museum. I also do the outreach programs. And so we saw the need of really beginning to engage folks outside of the MA. We have the same audiences. We're really creating these spaces for them to connect deeper with the museum, but there's still like this huge gap of folks that aren't coming and aren't sharing their work or aren't like becoming leads and reaching out to us wanting to share their work. And so we're putting a lot of intention into that. And that's how my job is also lending to that, really going out into the community, sharing art and history and connecting with families, asking them, what do you want to see? What other programs do you go to? I'm also working with the city of Watsonville and the Watsonville Public Libraries and Community Action Board in creating programs similar to Stories Under the Influence in Watsonville. And those are one of the ways how intercultural programs take that role of how are we really supporting these other communities in our county without expecting them to come here first. Really saying like, let's build a relationship. Let's see how well we work together and let's see how much more we can build once we start that initial relationship. And so that's another reason why this position was created, is really to engage those audiences that haven't been coming or haven't been engaging at all with the Museum of Art and History.
So you started at the MA as an intern. How did you pursue that opportunity as a UC Santa Cruz student?
I applied for a summer internship. I didn't get it. Heart was broken. But then I was offered a position for the year-long internship, which I was very grateful for. And so I started off as an intern. I did the first Friday art activities, but I'm a metiche, so I started like doing other things around. So I helped a very, very few bits with the exhibition, but I also contributed to Third Friday festivals. And I left to work at a nonprofit down at USC for a couple years, and I got this job offer as a community programs coordinator 3 years after leaving Santa Cruz. And my job has been evolving ever since. And so it's been a really wonderful experience. I did find this opportunity on like the arts department website. Thought like, this sounds pretty cool. It said community programs internship. So I went for it because it said community programs, not because it said museum. And so when I applied, it was really wonderful to hear the questions that they were asking, very centered on creativity, experimentation, and community. And so my perspective of a museum was shifted pretty drastically because of my experience as an internship. I would have never seen myself working at a museum if it weren't for the Museum of Art and History, which is pretty amazing. And so that's been my journey from shifted perspectives to now, this makes sense. Why don't all museums become a community center? Folks who are familiar with this type of institution are already going to come, and it's going to be the same cycle of folks who step into these spaces. But what about the folks that are going to really benefit from not only listening to these stories, but we're going to benefit way more from them sharing their stories? And it's really going to be more reflective of like who our community is, and like really preventing erasure from a lot of communities as well, that we're able to preserve those traditions, we're able to preserve those stories. And so the MA is a really great platform for that, as Elise was saying.
So, Elise, tell us about this new social experience you've organized, this program called Power Hour that takes place at the MA.
So Power Hour was actually created because of a personal thing, which was my birthday. So at the time I had lived in Santa Cruz for about 3 years and had, some close friends, but a lot of acquaintances, like a thing that a lot of people experience. And I wanted to have a birthday party that would make everybody in my life feel welcome and fun and not be awkward. And so this was actually based on a drinking game called Power Hour, in which you take a shot of beer per minute. This is a sober if you want it to be experience. There's just a different experience every minute for 60 minutes in a row. And so for the purposes of my birthday party, it was perfect because the way it works is I've created like a video that plays, and every minute there's a different prompt. So 1 minute it might be high five everybody. Another minute it might be tell somebody the last time you cried. Another minute it might be throw popcorn in someone's mouth. And so if you can imagine a room filled with 100 strangers, it becomes a very quickly bonding experience that's kind of fueled by playfulness and vulnerability and yelling and it's really fun. So I did this for my birthday party. It was super fun and successful. At the end, people were coming up to me and saying that they had been on their first date with somebody that they brought there, and now they're going to start dating, or somebody that, I introduced two friends who hadn't known each other before, and they were like, I've already cried with you and told you I love you. Do I really need to be introduced to you? So it's some powerful stuff that happens in that room in that hour. And we've replicated it for the Ma as a public program a few times. One of my favorite times was actually on Inauguration Day last year. It was a very powerful, emotional day. People's spirits were super low, and I honestly didn't want to do it. It didn't feel right. And, people at the Ma were encouraging it and were saying that this is actually maybe exactly what we need on a day like today. And it ended up being one of the most powerful emotional opportunities to kind of really break down some of those barriers that we have between us. And about 150 people in the Ma laughed and cried and hugged and ran around for an hour. And at the end, you could just feel the energy in the room was something very precious. And people were coming up to me afterwards and saying how much it mattered to them and how much it meant. One of my favorite stories was somebody afterward who was I just, want to keep being surrounded by people. So he just went to Bookshop Santa Cruz afterwards to continue being around people. So it's become a really fun thing that I've also done for other conferences and parties and events around the country.
I think we are inherently social beings if the conditions allow that socialness to come out.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that I take away from it is how little we actually need to be able to just turn to the person next to us and connect. You need so little to be able to do that. Even if you're an introverted person, I think if you are in a well-designed space, that really makes it safe for you to do that. I do some guideline setting, some boundary setting in the beginning that I think helps with people feeling safe in that environment. And it becomes just a wildly connective social experience.
Do you have another one planned anytime soon?
The last Thursday of November. Mark your calendars, folks, and powerhouroffun.com.
Sounds great. Now, Helen, you talked about developing this Ma relationship in Watsonville, but sometimes building those relationships can take time and they can be challenging. What have been some of the challenges you've experienced in trying to cultivate this relationship in South County?
There's a couple of things that come to mind. So one specific one that's related to outreach. So when I take a booth out into Watsonville and connect with all these families, I've been going to really big festivals. And so one of the things that I struggle in that situation is there's so many families that are coming through and I'm offering very little time to each of them just because I'm constantly having to talk about them all, talking about what are you interested in? What do you enjoy? How was this experience for you? For about 400 people in 4 hours. That's one thing I struggle with is really trying to build a relationship in a very, very crowded room. And so one of the things that we're trying out for 2019 is really being invited and asking permission to be in a space that's a lot smaller and a lot more intimate. The silver lining of being in those big festivals is other organizations have approached the booth and said oh, do you do this at other events? Could we have you at our event? It's yeah, how many people show up? They're 50, 100. I was okay, I can definitely do that. I would want to be more centered and have smaller folks just to be able to have those conversations with people. One other challenge that I am facing, it's not a huge challenge, but I do see it have an impact as I further work with Watsonville is just not assuming that they need me. They have it together, and I've always known that, but I constantly tell people this isn't a Ma event. This is a program in partnership with the Ma. These folks are the ones running it. I'm really just supporting the logistics and really helping them kind of organize that dream that they have just because I am working with the city, I am working with the library and Community Action Board. 3 organizations that are extremely busy and also responding to the community. And so one thing I have to remember is just like really be open and listen. It's like, well, what are your needs? And creating more time and space for that, which is a third challenge for both the outreach and this collaboration, is finding the time to build that relationship, because it all takes time. I do not expect us to be an amazing partnership right off the bat. I've been really lucky that that's been the case in some situations, but I really wish I had more of the time to provide that space and to be given that space, because it is a community that I am not from, not a community I'm not 100% familiar with. So making time to learn about them, learn about what their needs are, and learn about what I can share, because we all have something to offer. And so that's one of the main struggles with the both of them, is finding the time. Something I've noticed too is not stressing over wanting to engage so many people at once. In the beginning, I did feel myself like, oh, like I need to hit this number. I have to connect with all these people, but really thinking of like, what did they get away from that interaction? And so as I was getting familiar with this role, I started seeing myself just having a conversation with someone and just nothing else mattered, but just like that. Unless like someone started cutting like their hair, then I'll go like respond to that. But really, I was able to engage with some parents. I told them about the portrait show, and they're like, oh, like I'd love my kid to submit. And I gave them the resource, and like I've been emailing their daughter about like other opportunities, which has been really great. There's some folks that I see around town when I go to Watsonville, like, hey, you're that person from the booth. And it's just really nice to be that face that they are familiar with. And I just check in on them and like ask them just like, how's this project you told me about going? And it gave them that time, and they gave me that kind of openness to share that time with me as well. Because if I just show up and just like, oh, I'm here to listen, it doesn't do anything. It's really just like, do you want me to listen to you? What is it that you want to share? And so it's been really nice shifting that focus mentally when I do outreach.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Are there any final comments that you would like to share?
I mean, I just want to really also, based on what Helen was just saying, like what makes those experiences so much better is if we have a ton of really awesome, especially if you're bilingual English-Spanish, volunteers to really help. You can be a part of all the work we're talking about. Just go to santacruzma.org/volunteer. We have lots of stuff to do that can work with your schedules.
Thank you guys so much for coming on.
Thank you.